What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Alex here from Team Generations, and today we are joined by Alec, my teammate, aka Oatman. You might follow him on Twitter and see him just around and about. He has done pretty well in some other events, rising star, so to speak. So very happy to bring you the top 8 profile from BCS Manhattan. He put a lot of work into this, so I'm going to pass it over to him. We're going to go through the deck, and if you guys are enjoying the content, make sure to leave a like on the video. Possibly consider subscribing to the channel, give any positive feedback or anything down in the description below. Way to go, Alex. So here we go.
What's going on, guys? I am now Alec. Glad to be here. I've been here on the channel a few times thanks to our buddy Alex. Glad to be here as an official member of the team though. So here is my top 8 BCS Manhattan deck profile. Before I get into the cards, I just wanted to give a few shout outs. First off, just to all the other members of Team Generations for helping me get the cards I needed, and more importantly for helping me test games. I think we probably did over 100 matches just practicing, helping me get comfortable with the deck and helping me learn specific matchups. So huge shout outs. And another absolutely massive shout out is my friend Sage1804. Incredible player, incredible deck builder. He really gave me the initial list and helped me evolve the deck into what it really became and was in the final build that helped me get this far. So absolutely could not have done this without everyone involved. Without further ado, let's get into the cards. Starting off with the main deck here, we have 2 copies of Silver Singer Q-Tire. This really is the biggest reason to play this deck. It's what makes it work. It says, it's a grade 3 that says, when placed on Vanguard or Rearguard, declare a card name other than its own. If you do, you reveal cards from the top of your deck until you reveal the declared card or a normal unit with the same name as a card you already revealed. You add the declared normal unit from deck to your hand. So it basically says, as long as your entire deck is one-ofs, it is a Highlander deck, you can add anything from your deck to your hand. This really just lets you get anything you want, whether it's offensive, defensive, lets you adapt to so many different situations, and it really is what makes this deck what it is. Now, even though this is supposed to be a Highlander deck, I'm running 2 copies of it because even if there's just one on the field, then that means the other one cannot be in the deck. There won't be 2 in deck for this to reveal 2. And there's a few other cards that we're running 2 of or more than, but for the most part it is Highlander. After that, we are running the main Vanguard, the main boss unit. This is 4 copies of Velvet Force Reindeer. The reason we can run 4 of this is that its first effect says, in deck when it's revealed by a card effect, it is regarded as a trigger unit instead of a normal unit. So when revealed by Q-Tire, it will be a trigger unit, so it won't, like, when you reveal 2, it won't stop the search because she only declares normal units. And then also at the end of the battle that it attacked, you can discard 2 cards from your hand, reveal the top 10 cards of your deck, and if all of those normal units among them have different card names, you can ride any one of them except for a reindeer, gets drive -1, and then at the end of turn it goes back to bottom of the deck and you rewrite a grade 3 from your soul. So this card is the main Vanguard. It's incredibly useful. You can ride up into it and then end up soul blasting it out to go back down to grade 2 and deny the opponent's stride. It's incredible on the kill turn when you go back into it with one of the strides, which we'll talk about later, and is just amazing for pressure, amazing for a card advantage. Overall, really good card. Finally, now getting into the one-ofs, we have one of Heart Monopoly Inezga. This is a grade 4. When it's placed on Vanguard, you reveal top 10 cards again. If all the normal units have different card names, you can get one of every single gift, so a Force, an Excel, and a Protect. So on top of the the Force that it already gives, you'll get an extra one of each, so you can get an Excel 2 and draw a card. This card, as crazy as it reads, is actually not as useful because it's really only good on your first turn when you ride up, since later in the game when you're trying to kill with it, it doesn't exactly apply any pressure since you're not like calling anything or restanding using it. But still, overall, good card. Up next, we have School Attile Olivia. This card, when it attacks a Vanguard, choose up to 5 of your rear guards. If all of them have different card names, which they will be since everything is only at 1, you stand all of them. If you stood 3 or more rear, she gains a crit. So this card is just really good for applying pressure, especially on a kill turn. Next card we have up is actually very similar, so just going to have them together. This is Happiness Heart Lupina. It's got an act skill where you can check top 7, call a normal unit and get a force, but since you're usually going to be rewriting into it off of Reindeer, the more important part is When it attacks, you counterblast 1, stand all of your rear guards on circles with force markers. So it's mainly, these two are your main ones for ideally finishing off the turn. You get 3 Vanguard attacks and then you reset your rear guards multiple times. It's for a huge, big attack, big power turn. Next, we have one of Perfect Performance Anj. This card, when it attacks a Vanguard, you counterblast 1, choose any number of any normal units on both players' fields, you bounce them to hand. If you did 2 or more, she gets +10. 3 or more, you get a force, and 4 or more, you can choose any unit from your deck and call it to rear. So this is good, again, for pressure or also just for farming cards, especially on that ride up turn. You ride up, you go back into this off the reindeer, you bounce all your cards back, and then you can get anything you want, like another Q-Tire to search, or maybe just another attacker, like the Tiro that we'll talk about soon. And it's really just a very versatile card. Something about this deck is every card tends to have multiple uses. You can use it offensively, defensively, everything just has multiple uses, and you can really be very flexible with how to play the deck. So up next is the Chocho debut stage Tirua that I just mentioned. When it's placed on Vanguard only, you can choose any number of normal units on any player's rears, bounce them to hand. If 3 or more were returned, she gets +15, she'll be 28,000 to attack with. And then on Van and rear, at the end of the battle it attacked, if 3 or more rear guards were returned to hand this turn, you can counterblast 1, discard a card, stand it, and it'll get drive -1. So if you rewrite it off the reindeer, it will have 0 drives, but it's a way to get another attacker. And it can be especially useful since you can, since this is Bermuda Triangle, put it on a rear guard with a bunch of force markers, attack with it, bounce it back to hand, tap, and call it back, and then attack with it and restand and attack again. So each time, if you have met that 3 or more condition, this essentially functions as 2 attacks. Moving on to the grade 2s, we actually have another card that is not a one of. We are running 2 of Top Idol Aqua. This card, when placed on Vanguard and rear, you return one of your other normal units on rear to hand, and if you do, you draw a card and discard a card. You can only use this ability once per turn, even with multiple copies. And then during your turn, if you have another unit in the same column, this unit gets +5,000. So the reason we run 2 of this is that this is just the easiest way to bounce back the Q-Tire. So you'll always, once you see your Q-Tire, call it, declare Top Idol Aqua, search for it, and then use the Aqua to bounce back the Q-Tire and call it again, and just keep reusing it and keep searching for the cards you need. Up next is Courteous Beauty Seria. When placed on Van or rear, you can discard a card, look at the top 3 cards of your deck, choose up to one of them, put it in your hand, and the rest go to bottom. She gets +5,000 power, and if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, she gets +10 instead of +5. So just a really good card for helping dig for the pieces you need, converting, maybe if you went quick second, converting the quick shield into any real card that you need, and just overall digging for the pieces. Overall, just a good card. Next is probably the best grade 2 ride target. This is Jewelry like Clasina. This is when placed on Vanguard, you counterblast 1 and Soul Blast 1. Look at the top 3 cards of your deck, put one into your hand, you one onto the bottom, and then you call the other. So this is more chances to see cards that you want, and unlike the Seria, you actually get to make use of 2 of them instead of just getting 1 and the other 2 going to deck. So you can even high roll, see a Q-Tire off of this, and then call it immediately and get it to field and start your searching. And your opponents usually won't damage deny in this deck, so if you see it, this is just a really good ride target. Next is a very prominent Bermuda Triangle card. This is one of Choco Loveheart Lieselot. So when it's placed on Van and rear, you can look at the top card of your deck, call it to rear, or put it into Soul. Just like the Aqua, you can only use this once per turn, even with the same name, so even if you bounce it and call it back. But also in hand, it can be called as a grade 1. So when you go second, if you are trying to just rush down your opponent, you can call this, get another body, and just start attacking a lot. And just like the Clasina and Seria, this really just helps you get through your deck if you haven't found the Q-Tire, since that really is what makes the deck work. You start digging through, looking at the top cards, and trying to find that really important piece to start getting everything else you need. Up next for the grade 2s is one of Electric Essence Sistico. This card has 2 effects. One is a continuous if any rear guard from any player was returned to hand this turn. She gets +10. She's a 20k attacker, really good just for a big beater, but more importantly, when placed on rear, you may put a normal unit from drop zone onto bottom of your deck. If if you put a grade 3 or greater unit, you can choose one of your opponent's rear guards, and that unit does not stand during your opponent's stand phase. So it's just a nice way to put units back to deck. You can put the Pearl Sisters, which we'll talk about later, back, or any of the ride targets if you maybe saw too many of them and you need to put them back for the reindeer kill turn. And if you put a grade 3 or greater, you can maybe just mess up the opponent a little, just catch him off guard with a little paralyze effect. Next is one of my personal favorite cards in the deck. This is Attractive Glow Sandy. This is a grade 2. As an effect in hand, it may be regarded as a card with heal, so you can essentially discard it for a G-Guardian. So this is essentially a normal unit that acts as a G-Guard, which means you can search for it off the Q tire. So if you're going for a defensive play, one of the first things you can grab is this Sandy, and that's just incredibly useful to be able to have access to your G-Guards at all times, since there's some really good ones in here. Up next, we have Tide Conductor Echoes. It's a 8k power grade 2, but it has the ability when your Vanguard is placed, you may have it get +5, you may have this unit get +5 until end of turn, and if that Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, you can Soul Blast 3 and draw 2. So this is an incredibly important piece for riding down, since with the reindeer, you can use this, ride into something during the battle phase, and then Echoes will activate. You can Soul Blast out the reindeer, and then at the end of turn, when the card that you rerode goes to bottom of deck, you won't have a grade 3 in Soul. You can ride anything and just get the grade 2 back onto your Vanguard, so your opponent will not be able to stride. And on top of that, this is really good because it will draw you 2 extra cards, so you're kind of denying the opponent plays while also gaining a lot of advantage yourself. So just a really good card. Running out the grade 2 lineup, we're actually going to be talking about a grade 2 and grade 1 together. These are the Pearl Sisters, the grade 2 Pearl Sisters Perla, Pearl Sisters Pearly. So these two, you can only run one of them in your deck, which is not a problem for our deck, which wants to only run one ofs anyway. And when they're both on field, they both become 28,000 and 2 crit attackers, which is incredibly powerful. It's not hard to get both of them. With Q tire, you get one, bounce back the Q tire, get the other, and then you just call them both. And since this Bermuda triangle, you're going to be attacking with them, bouncing them back, and calling them a lot. The highest ceiling kill turn that this deck can have involves attacking with these 7 times, since you'll be resetting them. So that's just almost no deck can live through that, even with a really strong hand. And overall, this is just one of the best offensive pressure tools the deck has, alongside with the Tirua. Next, grade 1, we have Popple Empathy Betty. And the reason I'm saying all these full names is because one of the things with Q tire is that you have to declare the card name, so it's really important to remember the full names of all your cards. Some opponents may let you just say, Betty, and they'll know what you're talking about, but, you may get sharked, and an opponent may say, no, you need to know the full name. So in preparation for this event, I just made sure I knew all the full names of all the cards in my main deck, as all the normal units at least, just so I could search them without any issues. This one, when placed on Vanguard and rear, you reveal 7 cards from the top of your deck. If all normal units have different card names, you choose 1 card from your hand, put it on bottom, choose one of the revealed cards and add it to your hand, and then you shuffle. This has a lot of different applications. One, it's just really good for trying to find your Q tire. If you haven't found Q tire yet, there will still be 2 in there, so it can actually not resolve properly if you see 2 of that or 2 of the aqua, but it can be good if you only find 1 and are able to add anything. Another really important part about this card is that it does not need to add normal units. So unlike the Q tire, you can use this to add the stand trigger that we'll talk about later, or a heal guard, which is just really incredibly useful, or even a draw PG, just whatever you need off those top 7. Next is a very standard card. This is Mermaid Idol Sedna. It's just a grade 3 searcher from V. Every clan has one. When placed on Vanguard or rear, to look at the top 5 cards of your deck, add a grade 3, shuffle your deck, and if you added, you discarded. And then its +5 is the same as Aqua's if you have another unit in the same column. So it's almost always going to be a 13k booster or attacker, which is really useful. And it helps you find your Q tires or your reindeers if you need it to ride. Just overall a very useful card. Up next is another one of my favorites. This is Cuddle Connect Vanessa. It's a very simple effect, but it's a great one that says, end of the battle that it attacked or boosted, put a grade 3 or greater from drop onto the bottom of your deck. She goes into soul and you draw a card. So this can let you put back your heal triggers or your reindeers or your cure tires or your ride targets. Then she just ends up going into soul and drawing you another card. So if you're just hard drawn to this, or even if you just have an extra search off the cue tire, I found myself searching into this a lot, especially during testing, since it just becomes a body on board that can also convert itself back into another card in hand. We have, this is Equable Career Spiana. When placed on rear, you return a card with the same name as a grade 3 on your van or rear from drop zone into your deck, and then you shuffle and countercharge. So it's just a good low cost, basically no cost countercharge. If you've got a reindeer on Vanguard and a reindeer on drop, you can just put one back. Maybe you discarded one to stride, and then you can put one back and countercharge. If you have a heal, you can call it down too, and then put a heal back from the drop zone and shuffle your deck. So it's a good way to put heals back as well, and just countercharge if your opponent maybe didn't give you damage, if they're trying to stop your plays, but this is just a good way to get your resources back. Next up is a relatively new promo. This is Prism on the Water Murtoa. It's a really good card. When it's placed on Vanguard and rear, you may Soul Blast 1, both you and your opponent draw a card, and if your Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, both you and your opponent choose a card from their hands and call them, and your opponent's autos do not activate, so any on places they have, they won't be able to get, but you do get them. And this is really good both for offense and defense, even just early as a ride to just help find more pieces, or later on, this can especially be good since you can call off the new Stride Heltruda, if you to play around certain disruptions like Narukami has, can call one of the Pearl Sisters and then call the Murtoa, and then Murtoa will call the other Pearl Sister. That way you have 3 on board, and then if the opponent tries to use MP Dragon, you can just get rid of the Murtoa, still have both Pearl Sisters on board. This can also, against certain decks, be used defensively. If you're going against something that has a very high deck speed, like NLK Barrow or maybe Grand Blue, you have ways with your G-Guards to call this out on their turn, make them draw a card, then bounce it back and use it again, maybe make them deck out. Did that quite a few times during testing. Just really useful against opponents that aren't prepared for it. Last minute addition I had to the deck. This was Cooling Heart Eureka. This is from the new Lyrical 3 set. It's got 2 effects. One, when your other unit is placed in the same column as this unit, if your opponent's Vanguard's grade 3 or greater, she gets +5, so it's a 13k booster, which is nice. The really key part of this card is the second effect, which at the end of the battle, this unit boosted a rear guard. You can Soul Blast 1, choose the boosted rear guard, and return it to your hand. This card is just like the Echoes, really good for riding down since it Soul Blasts during the battle phase. So you can re-ride with the Reindeer, attack with this behind like the Q tire, and then bounce back the Q tire. So this is really good for protects the Q tire that you can reuse for next turn while also Soul Blasting and letting you ride down. The final way to ride down, this is another D series card. This is Appassionato Justine. Very simple effect, 6k power, and when it's discarded from your hand during your turn, Soul Blast 1, call it to an open rear. So since the Reindeer discards for cost, you can call this out and Soul Blast out the Reindeer so you can ride down. Can also be good on Heltruda turns, just to make another booster, just like with the Murtoa. You can call it back out and just have another body on board to defend against something like MP Dragon. Some of the more defensive cards for the grade 1s, this is Secret Smile Pumo. It's a GB1 effect when placed on Guardian Circle. You choose a card from your hand, call it to an open rear, and if you do, she gets +5k shield. So it's a 10k shield, which can be useful, but more importantly, the fact that you do get to call cards to rear during the opponent's turn, but to activate all their effects, like Q-Tire, like Aqua to bounce rear guards, or some of the other cards that we'll discuss in a second. The other defensive cards we have is the Light Elemental Hanli. It's a Cray Elemental, probably very well known. All rear guards cannot attack the Vanguard in the 5th or more battle unless Counterblast 1 is paid, and when it's placed, you have to choose a face-up card in your damage and flip it face down. So this is a good defensive card to really slow down your opponents, especially decks that really want to attack a lot, like in the Mirror Match or in Spike Brothers or Steam Maidens or Narukami. And this is especially potent because we have several ways, like the Pumo or like our G guards, which we'll discuss, to call it during the battle phase. So a lot of decks only really have removal during the main phase, and once you call this during the battle phase, it's hard for them to really get rid of it, so they're just kind of stuck there. Another defensive card, we have another D-Series card. This is Blue-Haired Prodigy Resius. Very simple effect. When placed on rear, you choose one of your other units, and it gets plus 10,000 power. So the keyword here is that it says one of your other units, so you can choose your Vanguard, and then it will be a 23k base defensively, even on your opponent's turn. So it's like seeing a trigger without having to actually take damage. And it can also be useful because you have ways to call it out, and then if you've got more G-Guards, you can bounce it back and call it again, become 33, and really just shut down some decks that really rely on hitting you a lot of times for smaller numbers. Last of the grade 1s, this is Determined Cheerfulness Sarka. It's just an overdressed PG. You don't have to discard if you have one or less cards in your hand. More importantly, it is a normal unit, so it's a perfect guard that you can add off Q-Tire. So, for example, if you're riding down and you need some extra defense since you can't G-Guard and you're not at GB1, this is a really good card to add off of it, since if your opponent's going to be applying pressure, you can just PG and not have to worry about a lot. Before we get to the triggers, we have one extra grade 0. This is First Lesson Akari. It says Forerunner. It's not the starter that we use, but it does have that. And then it has Harmony, which means when your other unit's placed in the same column as it, both units become in Harmony, the state. And it's got an ability where if it is in the Harmony state, GB1, it gets the ability that you can put it into Soul, choose one of your other rear guards, return it to hand, and you draw a card. So this is usually the next card in like the chain that you'll get off Q-Tire, because you can go Q-Tire, get Aqua will bounce the Q-Tire, and Q-Tire can grab the First Lesson Akari. You can call the Akari, call something else so they're in Harmony, and Akari will bounce the Q-Tire and draw you a card, so it lets you thin through your deck while also getting some pluses and drawing a card. So you really just get what you need, thin your deck for triggers, and it's just overall a really good card. And last up, we just have the V-Starter. V-Starters are really good, no reason not to run it. Get a Quick Shield if you go second, which you can convert into any card with something like the Betty and like the Sedna. Just not really much else to say about it. Moving on to the triggers, it's very standard, it's not super exciting trigger lineup. We've got 3 of the Draw PGs, running 4 of the Stride crits. When you discard it, you can stride with it. And then 2 of the GB crit that goes into Soul, give your Vanguard plus 10 and you draw a card. Then 1 of the Overdress Effect critical trigger. This was actually supposed to be one of the GB crits, but I only had 2, so I just threw this in. But it actually did end up helping because there's a certain card in the G zone that, just like some of the other cards, it checks top cards, but it does actually count if the triggers have different names, so having that little extra bit of diversity was really important. Then I have 4 of the Heal Guards, just like good for defense, not really much else to say about them. Yeah. And then the last 2 triggers, we're running 1 of the Dreamer Kruk. This card is actually limited to 1, which is why we only run 1. Just like the Akari, it has the Harmony state, and if it is in Harmony at GB1, it gets the ability where end of the battle it boosted, you can put it back into your deck, bounce a card from your field, and call a card from your hand. So it lets you just reset cards. If you're trying to farm, you can put this in Harmony with a Q-Tire, bounce it back, call the Q-Tire, and just get another search to add whatever you need. Or if you're going for a kill turn, you can put this behind the Tirua or a Pearl Sister. If you put it behind the Tirua, that'll be 2 extra attacks because it can swing twice after it resets. And the Pearl Sister, you just get another big 2 crit attack. And last card in the main deck is the Overtrigger. Bushiroad, please ban these. I think I saw mine 4 times throughout the day. 3 of them were offensive, so throughout the entire game, all my rear guards gained plus 10. The first one being on my very first drive check of round 1. So it was just like, throughout the entire game, I had this insane pressure, and it really just was not like fair. These cards are not fair. The Overtrigger is just, it needs to go. Simple as that. Moving on to the G Zone, we have two of, I would consider, the main stride. This is the new stride from Premium Collection. This is Helltruda. When it attacks, you discard 3 cards from your hand. You return all the cards on your circles other than Vanguard Circle to your hand, choose 2 cards from your hand and call them to rear. And at the end of the battle, you Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1, put this unit back into the G Zone face up, and you stand your Vanguard. So this is your main attacker, when you're just trying to close out the game, which can be as often as your first stride if you're able to. This is just going to be your big pressure turn, since it lets you reset your board, and then after that, it goes back into the G Zone, so you have your Reindeer, which still attacks for Twin Drive, which then leads into another Vanguard swing based on what you see off the top 10. Two things to note actually, one about this, one about the Reindeer. This and another card we'll look at later actually bounces all cards on your circles, so in something like the Link Joker matchup where they lock your cards, since this doesn't just bounce rear guards, it locks cards on circles, it can actually just return your lock cards to your hand, easy peasy. And another fun thing you can do with Reindeer to kind of just stop your opponent's plays is, since this doesn't have to ride a grade 3, at the end of the battle it attacked, you can ride a grade 2 or a 1 or a 0, and since both players are now not grade 3, your opponent actually can't G-guard, so if you don't see one of your big combo extenders like the Olivia or the Lupina, that can be a good way to just throw off the opponent and just make them maybe lose some extra value that they might have had in their hand to guard with. One of Elprina, this is a very simple effect. Act, Soul Blast 1, choose 2 of your rear guards, return them to hand. Just a nice card for when you want to just kind of farm out the game. You can call the Q-Tire, bounce it back with the Aqua and Akari, then use this, bounce it back to hand as well as another card, and just keep going off of that and just getting more and more cards in your hand. There's another commonly run stride that is the Alc, which we are not running because actually was running that and I cut it last minute. That is another card that people often run for sort of farm turns, but I actually ended up cutting the Aina, which is generally used with that, to make room for the Yuika, and honestly I did not regret it at all. The Perfect Performance Ange, this is the G stride version of the Ange that we talked about earlier. It's going to affect GB2, you Counterblast 2, flip up a card in your G Zone, choose any number of any player's cards on any circle other than Vanguard, return them to hand. She'll get +5 until end of turn for each card returned. If returned 5 or more, she draws a card, and if returned 7 or more, she gets a drive. So another way to just kind of gain more advantage, can maybe bounce back some of your opponent's cards that are sort of like pesky, like the First Thunder for Narukami, and again, just like the Elprina, lets you bounce back the Q-Tire and just keep reusing it, as well as being able to apply pressure. Since this will be big with 4 drives, it'll be gaining 35 if you hit that 7 threshold. So with a 28 base, that would be 63 with 4 drives, which is very scary, especially after you've compressed your deck and have almost all triggers, since you've been using Q-Tire to take out all your normal units. Sort of last minute addition along with that Yuika, this was Federica. When placed, you reveal the top 10 cards of your deck. If all of them have different card names, that actually includes the trigger units, so you got to be careful with that. But if you do manage to hit that, you call up to 5 face down mermaids from your G Zone. They get +15 power and can attack from the back row. So this is just, although it may be unlikely to resolve, you can sort of make sure that it does resolve by just keeping track of your stride crits, your reindeers, your heal guards, just all those 4 ofs, and just make sure that if you have too many of them in the deck, maybe don't go for this. But if you do resolve it, it is a very low commitment, essentially 0 commitment turn that still gets you 6 attacks for all 30k power or more with your force markers. So it's especially good again against decks like Narukami, which was the most popular deck in the room, since they have a lot of disruption tools like the Impede and the Bulwark, and they really just will still need to use disruption against this, so they'll be using a lot of their defensive cards while you committed this turn for nothing, which can be really good just for the advantage game and then closing out the game after they've used all their tools. The Chocho popular favorite Tirwa has 2 effects: an act where you can turn up a card in the G Zone, it gets a continuous where all your units with Chocho and their card names get in the front row get +5 for each of your open rear, so that is both herself and the Tirwa grade 3 that we talked about earlier. And then GB3, at the end of the battle, this unit attacked. Choose 3 of your rear guards, put them on bottom of deck. If you put 3 cards, you stand her and she gets drive -2. It's going to be a 1 drive restand, but since you just put back a bunch of cards, she'll end up becoming a lot bigger. You'll get +15 to her with the first skill. I never actually ended up using this card throughout the day, but was overall just a good addition to the deck and is very useful. Up next is the Shandy. This is our only stride since we're not running the Alec that has the Harmony ability itself. So, if you're in a little awkward position, which is what happened to me in my top 8 actually, you've got the Akari, you can just call the Akari here, and then they'll both be in the Harmony state, since it was called to the column with the Shandy that has Harmony. If 6 or more units are in Harmony, which you can't actually achieve in this deck because you only run 2 cards with the Harmony skill, she gets +1 crit for every face-up card in your G-zone. And also, when she attacks, you counterblast 1, turn the card face up, look at the top 10, and call up the same number as the number of your units in Harmony. So if you put something behind her, you can check top 10, call 2, and there's no name restriction. Even if you see 2 Q-tires, you can call both. It won't whiff. So this can be a good way to just, check top 10, really dig for the pieces that you need. We're running the Zeroth Dragon Megiddo. If you don't know what it does, this is when placed, you counterblast 2, you choose 5 cards from your hand or drop zone, you call them. They all get the ability that at the end of the battle they attack, you can swap them around with another unit. So this is a really useful finisher if maybe you can't go into the Helltruda or just in different situations. With all the rewriting with reindeer, you'll be getting a lot of force markers. You generally want to stack them onto 1 rear, because then if you can go into the Megiddo, you can attack with 1 rear, swap it, and then swap it again, and just keep swapping and getting attacks onto that 1 circle with a bunch of force markers. It's a really good way to close out the game. Running 2 of the Citron. This is probably the best G-Guard in the deck. Very simple effect. It's very similar to the Pumo. When it's placed on guard circle, you choose a grade 1 or greater from hand, call it to rear, and if you call, this gets +10 shield. It's 25 shield that also enables the same things that the Pumo does. You can call Q-Tire, Aqua, or any of the defensive cards like Resius and Hanali. Really just gain more advantage during the opponent's turn if you need it, or stop their plays with something like the Hanali. Next up is the new G-Guard from the Premium Collection. We're running 2 of the Lucrece. When placed on Guardian Circle, you counterblast 1, return a normal unit to your hand. If it was a grade 2 or less, it gets +15 shield, so this is a 30k shield, very big. And if it is grade 3 or greater, you can choose one of your Vanguards, and it gets +5 until end of turn. So just like with the Resius, this is another way to give your Vanguard permanent power during your opponent's turn. So you can go 18, and maybe with the Resius, 28. Just a good way to save cards in hand by making your Vanguard bigger defensively. And if you bounce a grade 2 or less, then she'll just be a 1 big shield for the battle, which can be very important. 2 of the GB1 G-Guard. This is Sandy. When placed on rear, when placed on guard circle GB1, you flip up another G-Guard. She gets +5,000 power for +5,000 shield, for every 2 cards in your hand. So since you'll be activating Q-Tire, bouncing back, and just really gaining a big hand, this can often just be your biggest G-Guard. It could be a 1-card guard for a lot of scarier, bigger attacks in the format. And then also, you can counterblast 1, give her another +5 shield. So if you really just need to hit that extra threshold, you can counterblast and pay for it. Just a good way to just be a big shield. We have Hand in Hand Leona. This card, you choose 1 of your rear guards. When it's placed on guard circle, you bounce it to hand. If you do, you choose a card from hand and call it to guard circle. If it's the same card that you bounced back, it'll get +5 shield, so that will be just an extra +5 shield. But more importantly, unlike the Lucrece, this is a way to bounce one of your rear guards that does not cost a counterblast. So if you really need to just bounce something back and call it again, like the Resius, you can use this, use the Citron, use this, and then use something like the Pumo or another Citron to call it back out. Rounding out the deck, we have the Dark Elemental Dismal. It's another Cray Elemental. It has resist on guard circle. More importantly, when it is placed, choose one of your rear guards. It cannot be hit, and it cannot be chosen by your opponent's effect. So if your opponent maybe has removal in the battle phase, such as Steam Maidens or the Mikani that is being played in Spike Brothers, you can call out the Hanali during the battle phase, and then immediately use Dismal so they can't touch it, and essentially you're saying this Hanli is staying on board, and there's nothing you can do about it, essentially. And that really wraps up the deck. So just before we do end off, I do actually want to go over my matchups and just how the day went. I ended up going 6-1 in Swiss, only losing in round 7 to the other undefeated, and then I ended up losing in top 8, unfortunately, so no invite, but still a really good day. So round 1, I went into Spike Brothers. I went second and drove check the Lyrical Overtrigger on my first drive check. They rode up, and then I had 2 perfect guards, so I managed to take 0 damage. They swung at a rear to try and damage an eye after I did guard their 2 Vanguard swings for the third one, just so they wouldn't give me damage. I strode into Alprina to just farm cards. I survived their big Galligabrus turn, and then I killed using Heltruda. Round 2, I played against the Leader Messiah. I ended up going first. I misplayed a little bit because I intended to ride down because I had Eureka on board with the Q-Tire. Instead, I ended up riding Ange, bouncing the whole field back and not Soul Blasting. I kind of just ripped apart my opponent's hand anyway. He had to stride Berrywen to get rid of all my force markers and just attack for a big number with a lot of crit. But I had a perfect guard for that, and then he ended his turn with only 4 cards in hand, so I was able to just use Heltruda, attack with the Pearl Sisters a bunch of times, and kill him from 2 to 6 damage. Round 3, I played against Vanquisher. I had a really insane ride up turn where I just gained a lot of advantage, applied a lot of pressure. They ended up actually forgetting to use their Exterminate skill to buff the front row during that match, but honestly, I was so far ahead during that match anyway, so I don't know how much it mattered. I would have easily been able to survive either way. They actually had 3 heals and triple impeded on before I swung with the Heltruda, which did get rid of my Pearl Sister plays because I had to get rid of 2 and then 1, and I only had 4 cards on board. But even then, with the amount of attacks I was doing with the Heltruda into Reindeer and just into whatever else, I was still able to finish them off. Round 4, I played against Eradicators. I go second. My opponent had to G-assist for grade 1, and then I had to G-assist for grade 2. He ended up seeing 2 crits, but I healed one of them, so I only stayed at 2 damage. I went into Federica. I ended up whiffing because I saw 2 of the stride crits on the top 10. But I still had a decent enough hand to just sort of make a board and swing with it, and I ended up seeing the OT offensively there as well. My opponent then strode into Stunverse, ripped 1 card out of hand only, and then another with the Vowing Sword. He only called another Cho-Oh and just put the power on that, didn't have much else to do, and I stopped that Cho-Oh from restanding by using a G-Guard to call to the front row. I then strode Ange to farm more cards again, just keep bouncing, keep gaining more cards, and especially with the Lyrical OT, I could already apply pressure as is. He used 2 impedes when I attacked with Vanguard, which killed 1 of my front row, but then still ended up taking my attack. And I saw 2 crits and then a draw trigger, which pushed my opponent to 5, and then he wasn't able to guard the big last attack that I put 3 triggers on, so that closed out the game there. Round 5, I played again against Eradicators. My opponent went first. I actually drew both Pearl Sisters early on, and this really wasn't the right play, but I just thought it was a little silly, so I slapped them both down to just pressure a little early on. He ended up riding up into Sweep Command and just immediately bound both of them. He saw a crit both on that Sweep Command turn and on the turn before, so I ended up going to 5. I had a big enough hand where I could safely go into Heltruda to apply pressure and even gain more advantage. I healed down to 4 and I pushed him to 4. He rewrote and then strode into Exterminate. I survived that turn, and I went into Heltruda again to close out the game. Round 6, I played against the Maidens. I went first. I rewrote into Anezka off the Reindeer to gain a lot of advantage. I didn't ride down because I know that deck can also ride down against me. He strode Slishma and did just regular Steam Maiden things. I survived. I went into a Heltruda turn with the Pearl Sisters for a lot of pressure and a lot of attacks. I didn't end up killing him, but my opponent just didn't have a lot of hand to be able to stride afterwards. He still was able to get a decent amount of attacks just with the regular Steam Maiden ride-up chain, or not ride-up, but with the attack chain, and with the Slishma in the G-Zone calling itself out. Actually survived with exact guard in hand, and then kept an extra reindeer in hand so I could stride Megiddo and finish off the game. Round 7, this was my only loss. It was actually a good friend of mine, Kay, who was also on Eradicators. We were both in essentially guaranteed top cut at that point since we were both undefeated, so it's a bit more of a casual game just to relax a little. I ended up just not really seeing pieces. I damaged one of my Q tires and couldn't find the other, so it was a pretty swift loss, but one that didn't really matter. Then finally in top 8, I was against Spike Brothers one more time. I just started with a really weak hand. I believe it was the Grade 1 Pearl Sister, Honolly, Reindeer, a Heel, and Olivia. So I ended up drawing into a Grade 2 to ride, but overall I just couldn't see pieces. I strode into Shandy to call down the Akari to try and reuse a Sedna to try and dig for the Q tire, which I did, but then my attacks were just not super offensive. My opponent actually used 4 Grade 2s in their hand to 1 to pass my Vanguard. I ended up seeing 2 crits, which pushed him to 4 damage, but I wasn't able to kill him. He then revealed after the game that his hand was pretty much all Grade 3s aside from that, so maybe if I had applied a bit of more pressure, I would have been able to get it, but wasn't really a way to know that, so I was still just trying to make the most of what I had in that situation. So unfortunately I did lose there, which means no invite to Worlds, but it was still really good time. I feel really accomplished with the deck, and I'm overall just super proud of how I played. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.